Okay, so a lot of folks are a mix of Monday experts, but not app experts. Okay, we've got a much more mixed group than I originally expected, than I originally thought when I saw all of the experts. Don't worry if you've barely started playing around with the tool. I'll make sure that today's session gives you the basics as well. For those of you who are already familiar with monday.com as a UI, are you also familiar with the apps infrastructure? Like, how many of you have already built an app? I see a few familiar faces, but if you're not an app expert or you've made a basic app, just like flag it as well. Okay, so got a few folks who have built an app, but it's fairly basic, as well as people who are familiar with the monday.com UI tool, but not so familiar with the apps. So we can go through both, and should be a good time. Perfect. One final question. I know a lot of you are joining this call specifically for the Q&A session. What are you interested in learning, getting out of this session? If there's a specific topic, if you just want general information, go ahead and share that with me in the chat as well. I want to make sure that my agenda touches on the things that y'all are eager to learn about. Okay, custom triggers, listening to events, understanding about authentication, some just general what apps can do, reporting, and some folks are just anything goes. Awesome. So I'll definitely cover some of these topics. Let me go ahead and write them down so that I don't forget them, and we can cover them later. You also will have noticed a Q&A section in the Zoom kind of webinar setup. You can use that for any questions that you have. That way, when folks use the chat, your question doesn't get pushed up. So yeah, use the Q&A section for that. And at the end of kind of the first half of today, I'll go through and answer all of the questions as well. Okay, a lot of folks are asking about our API specifically, as well as like general, like what can apps do? So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna stick to this agenda, but I will go quicker or more slowly through the sections that you've flagged that you're interested in already. So in terms of today's call, you've been staring at this for the last 5 minutes, but I'm going to go through the why. Why would you want to develop Monday apps? Why would you want to build on top of the monday.com work OS? I'll then show you a couple of examples of board views, widgets, integrations, and automations that that use our apps framework or could be rebuilt with our apps framework. So a lot of the features in our platform, you could build a copycat version of them using our apps framework. I think that's a really, really cool sign, because it means that we are kind of opening up our platform and all of its features to you. I'm also gonna, at some point, like closer to the end, just enumerate every single thing you can do with the apps framework, all of the features that are available to you, and then we'll do questions. Alrighty, let's go ahead and get started. Cornelius, I see you got a couple of questions as well. If you could put them in the Q&A section, that would be awesome. I want to make sure that I can get to them right at the end. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and close the chat, and I'll open it up in a little bit later. Okay, so before I get started, I want to show you a couple of resources that we have built for builders, for folks who are creating apps. Some of you may already be familiar with this. The first place that I would really recommend you check out is the community. That is at community.monday.com. Our community is kind of everything monday.com, but there's also a specific section for developers. So not only can you ask questions about using our apps framework and using our developer tools, but you can also browse the community to understand the different use cases that other monday.com users have. This is especially relevant to you if you're trying to build an app that is for public use that you want to feature on our marketplace. And I'll talk about the marketplace in a little bit. The other resource, of course, that I think you should go to is our apps documentation. You can access our documentation directly from your monday.com account by clicking on your avatar in the bottom left, hitting developers, and then there's a documentation link in the top right that you can click and get to. I'll show you this flow when we're in the platform as well. If you are a developer who is looking to build an app, but you are not 100% familiar with all of the monday.com features yet, that's totally fine. We do have a help center. There are a couple of different places to get there. You can go to support.monday.com, and you can also hit the question mark in your account UI. And finally, we have a webinar recording. What I will do is I will send you this recording in a few days to all participants. Alrighty, let's move on. So let me tell you a little bit about the monday.com Work OS, since it is kind of the core of our apps framework, right? The monday.com Work OS lets teams around the world build workflows in minutes. We have a set of building blocks, which include integrations, visualizations, board views, dashboard widgets, columns, table views, and you can mix and match them in order to build one or many workflow of your dreams. So what we want to do is allow teams to be able to work effectively and really get their work done. In terms of our company by the numbers, overall, we have 100,000 organizations who are managing their team with monday.com. We've raised $234 million in capital. We were launched in 2014. We have 6 branches around the world. We're currently at $150 million in annual recurring revenue, and we have over 500 employees. We're growing very, very fast, and the apps marketplace is one of the ways that we want to share that growth with other folks who want to be part of that journey. So let me tell you a little bit about the why. Why would you want to build Monday apps? Why would you want to take time out of your 40 hours a week in order to build something either for the marketplace or for your team? And how do you convince your manager, if you need to spend that time? So first off, we have 2 species of apps, right? We have public apps and private apps, and there are different reasons you would want to build each one. Public apps are apps that are shared with the world. They can be featured in our apps marketplace, or they can be shared with individual clients or via your own website if you want. One of the big benefits of being featured in our apps marketplace is we are launching it in October or November, later this year. What that means is if you are one of the first folks featured in the apps marketplace, you have first mover advantage. This will let you not only kind of latch on to the growth that monday.com and our user base is experiencing, but also set a standard in your industry. Of course, being part of the apps marketplace will also let you reach our 100,000 teams, 100,000 users around the world. And so if you have a product that is looking to reach more eyeballs, this is a great way to do that. And finally, if you have a product that a lot of monday.com users are using, if we have shared clients, you can of course create an integration or some kind of shared functionality that that exposes your app to these other users and vice versa. So those are public apps. These are apps that are shared with the world. For private apps, that's possible as well. If you wanted to build internal tools for your team, or you wanted to develop solutions for your customers who are using monday.com, you can use private apps for that. I think the real benefit of this is if you're already a monday.com user, you probably have workflows that could be 20% better if you had a little bit of integration or a little bit of customization. That's where you can use the Monday Apps framework to build those visualizations, connections with other tools, integrations, automations, in order to take your existing workflows to the next level. All right. In terms of upcoming opportunities for builders, the Monday Apps Challenge, I'm sure a lot of you have already been a part of this. Essentially, you can submit your app and you could win a bunch of different prizes. apps will be judged on engineering, creativity, craftsmanship, impact, and security, and the grand prize is the Tesla Model X. The Builders Workshop is a little bit less relevant because it's ending today, but we will have another one in August, so keep an eye out for that. It's a 2-day live workshop, and you can apply on monday.devpost.com. If you haven't already, I would really recommend registering for the Apps Challenge. Not only is it commitment free, if you register, it doesn't mean we're going to chase you to submit an app. All you're doing is signing up for updates. And that's really the best way to get exclusive content and these invitations to workshops. So if you haven't already, just go ahead and hit register. I did it in 2 minutes. It was super, super easy. I think you can do it with like your Google account as well. Okay, so if you haven't already done so, I would love for you to fill out this form. hey.monday.com/apps-for-builders. I see 2 folks have already done this, Bas and Theodore. I would love for the rest of you to do this as well. I'm gonna go ahead and put this link in the chat so you don't have to go back and forth. And the reason we're doing this is I wanna use this data to show you what you can do with monday.com. I wanna give you a few examples of apps that you can build. All right. Amazing. Thank you. Those of you who have filled it out. Bas, see you're enjoying life. That's great. We've got a couple of different students. This is really, really awesome to see. Theodore, you're implementing this into a manufacturing company. That's really cool. And Racine, I hope I pronounced your name right. You're studying computer engineering and you just want another project to work on. That's really, really cool to hear. Tejas, you're trying to work more effectively. That's really cool to see. And a lot of you are interested in the challenge. Awesome. Udi, perfect. All right, so what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to go through what an app is, and I'm gonna use this data to show you how you can visualize this data or use it in your app. So let's go ahead and get started. Before I go into the actual apps, I wanna first make sure we're on the same page about what a Monday app is. A Monday app essentially is a bundle of functionality in monday.com. Remember I was talking about those building blocks that you can move into a workflow, whether those are columns, whether those are integrations. A Monday app releases some combination of that functionality. It can contain one feature, so your app can be just one single integration recipe, or it can contain multiple features. For example, like a full service app that has visualizations, integrations, widgets, all sorts of cool stuff. Your app can be as big or small as you want it to be. And our software development kit and apps framework makes it easy. Today, we're gonna walk through all the components in our software development kit to make this happen. There are 2 different feature types that we support right now. From a developer standpoint, it's 2 types of features. From a user standpoint, it's really 4. We support client-side web applications, and they can be connected to a single monday.com board. We call this a board view, and I'll show you an example of this a little bit later. And you can also render that same client-side web app in a widget form, and that is connected to multiple boards, usually used in a combination with other widgets as well, so you can build a dashboard. On top of that, you can also create integration and automation recipes, and these are server communication. You basically implement the logic of an integration or an automation. For example, if something happens in another tool, you create an item in monday.com and you keep it updated. Or if something happens in monday.com, you update your super special CRM with that information. This is all server-to-server communication, and our SDK allows you to implement that in an easy way. So let's talk about what these really look like in monday.com. I've got a couple of different submissions already. This is enough data for us to start working with it. I wanna, for those of you who are brand new to monday.com, excuse me, I wanted to just show you what we're looking at right now. So this is monday.com. If you already have a trial account, you've seen this view already. We call this the table view. Top left, we have the name of the board. The board is essentially a table of information. And then down here, we have all of the entries in our table. In this case, I have one group. So all of these items are clustered in this one group, but I could have multiple groups as well. And each item has a set of columns. You can call them fields. We call them columns, and you can add more columns as well. We have a ton of different columns. I think we have over 25 column types, and each column contains a different data structure of information. So this is a text column, so it contains a string. This is a status column, so it contains a label, and the label is defined in our documentation in a certain way. It essentially has like the text label as well as the index or color. And we have a ton of other column types as well. With our API, you can read and update this, table view or this database table or whatever you want to call it. And you can pull this information out and render it inside your app. So if you were building a visualization, you can use this data to build out the visualization. And I'm going to show you an example of this. We have an app called the pivot board, and this essentially turns this data into a Excel type pivot table. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to add it from scratch. Since you probably don't have it already, go ahead and go to Add View, click on Apps, and then click on Pivot Board. When I hit Add View, it will then show this section up here, and this is what we call the board view. The board view allows me to view my board, i.e. the data in my table, in various different ways. In this case, as a pivot table. So what I'm going to do is pivot some of this information. I'm going to have my sentiment as rows, and then just my count in the totals section. So I can see how many people are excited, how many people love coffee, and so on and so forth. What's happening on the back end? So this pivot table was actually created in our apps hackathon with our apps framework. So not only is this, you can recreate it with the apps framework, but it's also it's also something that we did ourselves with the apps framework. So under the hood, it's hosted on our CDN in the same way that your app would be if you choose to do so, and it uses all of our SDK's information as well. What's happening on the back end here is this is a React library that we found for creating a pivot. We added some styling, and on the back end, it's making an API call using our SDK in order to collect the data from the board. So essentially, with any board view, what you're doing is you're connected to a board. You'll pull the data from that board, or maybe from other boards, depending on how your app is set up. And then you'll display it to a user in some way or another. This particular app is a read-only app. That is, it only shows me the data and it doesn't let me change it. But we have other apps which are write as well. So if you wanted to create an app that lets users not only see their data, but also change it, you can definitely set that up too. I want to now show you a dashboard widget as well. So remember that board view that I showed you earlier? You can display that in a dashboard and connect it to multiple boards as well. So if you wanted to have your visualization be connected to one board or be used in conjunction with other visualizations, you could do that as well in a dashboard. And you can expose this to your users as a different feature. Under the hood, these are iframes, just like the board view. And you can reuse the same code. This uses the same SDK and the same API that the board view does. So you could reuse the same code as long as it is responsive enough to work in a smaller container. You should be good to go. And you don't have to worry about developing a second feature from scratch. So those are those client-side apps that I was discussing, board views and dashboard widgets. I also want to show you integrations. Let me go back to the board that I had set up right now. Let me go to the main table, and I want to show you some integration recipes. So if you click on the little plug icon in the top, you'll see all of our integrations. And if you click on an example integration, for example, Slack, you'll see a bunch of recipes. Our apps framework lets you configure these recipes yourself. Every recipe contains a trigger, which happens either in monday.com or somewhere else when date arrives in this case, and an action. What happens when that trigger is invoked? In this case, it'll notify in a specific Slack channel. Here's another one. When an item is created, notify user. The trigger is happening in Monday, and then the action is happening in Slack. Now, the Slack integration is one where all of the recipes are Monday to Slack, but that doesn't need to be the case. You can also create recipes that are another tool into monday.com. Let me take Todoist as a good example. When a task is created in Todoist, Todoist is a task tracking to-do app. When a task is created, it then creates an item and syncs future changes from Todoist. The trigger is happening in Todoist, and then the action is happening in Monday. Our apps framework gives you an API as well as a protocol to let you create custom triggers so that you can build your own webhooks from other applications and ping the monday.com server when you want something to happen. And that way you can create all sorts of functionality. Not only can you watch for changes and sync up other tools, so your Magic CRM, for example, or Todoist, but you can also use that to create custom functionality from Monday to Monday. If you wanted to create a custom trigger that we don't have in the platform, you can do that as well. So that's a little bit about our apps framework and kind of the general information. I want to quickly show you how to build an app. To do that, you click on your avatar, you click on developers, and then in here, I've got a bunch of apps. You probably have this as empty. You can create a new app, and that will show the basic information page. We have a lot of documentation to go through each of these sections. I want to touch upon a few that are important. First is OAuth and permissions. We do support OAuth, so you can set up an authentication flow that gets an access token from the user directly using OAuth. And we also support scopes. The scopes apply regardless of whether you use OAuth or not. And your app will be scoped based on what permissions you give it. In terms of features, I want to show you how you would set up each of the features that I spoke about before. If you had a client-side app, you would either build a board view or a widget. When you click on this, you can use the view setup page to test your app. So you can either test it from a custom URL, that is from an iframe that maybe is tunneling from your local machine or from a development server. And you can also test it from a published build. The published builds are, they are your production code that is uploaded to our CDN and is served from our CDN. So you don't have to worry about hosting your own server. We'll handle all of that for you. And you can create a new build by hitting new build, upload it as well. And you can also roll back to previous versions if you need to as well. In terms of the API behind this app, behind board views, as I said before, all of these are iframes that are rendered in that container, that board view container. And our SDK allows you to get a bunch of different information from the boards. So if you wanted to get all of the items on the board, you can use our SDK to identify what board you're connected to, and then use our API to actually pull that information so that you can render it for a user. Our SDK also allows you to get some information from other UI elements as well. So if a user filters a board, you can see that. If a user adds settings and configuration, you can configure that as well. All sorts of fun stuff. In addition to board views, I also want to show you quickly the integration feature. There are three big things that I think are worth flagging. The first one is the authorization URL. By default, integrations don't use any authorization, but you can enable it if you want to, especially if you're connecting to other tools. When you enable the authorization URL, you're essentially giving our server an endpoint to redirect users to when they first set up the integration. That way, you can then choose whether to send this user through one authorization flow, 3 authorization flows, 20 authorization flows. It really depends on what kinds of tools you're connecting to. If you are connecting to, if you have a one-to-one integration, monday.com to Zendesk, for example, you might only send them through the Zendesk authorization flow, or you might send them through the Monday as well as the Zendesk. But you could also create an app that is connected to 14 different tools. Every time an item is created on Monday, send an email and also post in Slack and also create an item in Salesforce and also create an item in Todoist. Your app could theoretically do that. We do give you the flexibility to have all that information. And if you wanted to build such an app, you would then have to authorize with all of those external tools. And the authorization URL lets you do that. In terms of recipes, these are those little cards that we saw earlier in the integrations. Every time I create a new recipe, I get to choose a trigger and an action. In the trigger section, we give you a lot of monday.com defined triggers. So these are the greatest hits. When an item is moved to a group, when a column changes, scheduled trigger, which is like every X amount of days, recurring trigger, all sorts of triggers that we've already set up for you so you don't have to worry about them. If you wanted to create a custom trigger, for example, when an item is created in Todoist or something happens in your CRM, or even something that happens in monday.com that is not captured by one of these, you can create a custom trigger. I'm not going to go too into custom triggers unless folks have questions about them. But essentially, the custom triggers will set up a URL on our side that is subscribed to your app. And every time you want to invoke that trigger, you would send that URL a request. There's a bunch of information that goes into the custom trigger. The 2 things that are important here are the subscribe and unsubscribe URLs. These are essentially endpoints on your server that we will send a request to that says, hey, Dpro just created this integration on this board. Here is the webhook URL that you should ping every time you want to invoke this particular integration. And the unsubscribe does the opposite. It says, hey, Dpro just removed that integration, so go ahead and purge that from your database. It also includes input and output fields. These are optional, but these are really, really helpful because they define what data your server is going to send to monday.com and what data your trigger will then pass on to your recipe. The action is very similar, only instead of it being a trigger, it's an action. It's something that happens. The actions by monday.com, there are quite a few, just like in the trigger. And you can also create a custom action. A custom action just needs a run URL and input fields. This is essentially the URL that we'll post to, and we'll say, hey, look alive, something happened in monday.com, please perform your action. So this could be creating an item in Todoist, it could be sending an email to somebody, whatever it is, we will supply you the input fields and we'll ping the run URL and your server can do the rest. That is a super, super quick introduction to Monday apps as well as how to build a board view or an integration. If you want to get started and actually build one, especially for those of you who are just getting your feet wet, go ahead to our documentation. I'm sure you already have an idea of an app that you want to build, whether that's a client-side app or an integration. Go ahead and use our quick start guides for either of these features and play around with them. What's great about our quick start guides is that we do have a CLI that will let you download and install and run your development environment in one line of code. So all you need to do on the development side is run this in your terminal. And then after that, set up your app in the UI so that it can be accessed by people on your account. Same thing with the integration. It's super, super easy to set up. Go ahead and play around with it. If you have questions about additional resources, you can go to our design system. This is really helpful if you want to style your app like monday.com. Our SDK reference for all of the methods that are supported by our JavaScript SDK. We have a few example apps, and we of course have FAQs. That is all that I have for you today when it comes to content. I wanted to make it really, really quick so that we have plenty of time for questions. And I see we have 9 questions in the Q&A section. If those of you who don't have, who haven't already put it in the Q&A section, go ahead and put it in there already. I'm going to go in and read through them right now. Since we have 27 minutes left, I think we should be able to get all of them in. Okay, somebody asked if I'm going to send a link to the webinar later. Yes, I will. Boss is asking if there are any plans to do authorization without coding. Boss, can you explain a little bit more about this? From what you are asking, it sounds to me like you want something similar to seamless authentication that we have with our client-side SDK, where you don't have to worry about authorization to monday.com because we supply that API key from the user. It sounds to me like that's what you want. There are plans to do that. We do eventually want a situation where you don't have to do any authorization with monday.com because the user's API token will be sent to you. And we also do in the kind of far future, definitely won't happen in the next quarter, but it might happen later, is we want to be able to kind of host your integrations in the cloud as well. So in the same way that we would host your production builds for your web apps, we would also host Lambda functions essentially for your run URLs and stuff like that. So I hope that helps. Go ahead and if I didn't answer your question, I would love for you to just post it in the chat so that we can figure it out. Boss is asking, it's about how Integromat is doing authorization. It's simply to ask to log in to your Office 365 account so that you can do it in the UI. So on the back end, what Integromat is doing is they have implemented their own OAuth with Office 365. For us, we want to make the apps framework as flexible as possible, i.e., so you can connect to whatever app you want. And so right now, we don't really have plans to do authorization for specific accounts because each platform has a slightly different way of doing authorization. But it's a pretty cool idea. Let me think about how we can do that. And I'll pass this along to our developers as well, because they might have some ideas. Alrighty. Yeshwant is asking if we can do multiple submissions for the hackathon. I believe so. I believe you can submit as many times as you want. And if you have built 14 different apps, you can submit all of them. I would double check the rules in there though. There is a lot of small print that that I'm not 100% sure about, but I believe you can just submit multiple different apps if you wanted to. Okay, Cornelius, I see you have a couple of different questions. The first one is more of a comment. Apps with APIs. If you are connecting your app to the monday.com API, you can use our SDK to make those queries. Our API is a GraphQL API, and it takes in queries, parses them, and then returns data or updates data. And you can use our SDK to quickly make those requests without having to worry about setting up your HTTP request and worrying about authorization and all of that. You can do all of that on the client side seamlessly. On the server side, it's just like any other API. You would need to send us a request. And you can also create apps that connect to our API as well as others, similar to the integrations that we've built so far. As for reading and writing to tables, you can use our API to do that. And as long as your app has the requisite permission scopes, you can both read tables and display that information to users. And you can also update tables. Theodore has a question about npm run start not working on Windows 10. So Theodore, we did test the Hello World app on Windows, and it worked for us. This might be something that we need to dig into a little bit more. If you wouldn't mind, I would love for you to, I think there's already a community post about it. I would love for you to add on to it, and we can work together to try and figure out what's going on, and then also share it with other users that are hitting up the same problem. Let me go ahead and actually find that link for you, and I'll send it to you so it's easier. Okay, so this is our Monday community. In the apps and developers section, there's a bunch of information here. I believe in the FAQs section. Okay, I'm gonna just search for Windows 10 CLI. Nope. Here it is. Okay, so there was someone else who reported this. I would love for you to add on to this thread so that we can figure out what's going on. Include your Windows version, your npm version, as well as the error that you're having. If you could just copy paste the terminal logs, that would be perfect. Theodore, I'm gonna put this in the chat as well. All right. Tejas is asking about the hours column, the formula column, and the date column are not supported by cross-board automations. That's what I'm hearing from you, Tejas, where if you want to create a new item on another board using our inbuilt automations, you cannot do that because we don't allow you to map that information. If you build a Monday app, you can use our API to update that information across boards. You would need to implement the logic yourself though. Of course, with the automations, we do that hard work for you, but that is definitely possible. The one exception is the formula. So Tejas, right now, our formula column is not supported by our API. And the reason for that is the formula is calculated in our client side. So there's literally nothing in our database that says what the value of that formula is. And so we can't pull it from our API. Everything else will be, you'll be able to access it and update it on the other board. It's just for that formula column, you'll need to have a workaround to set it up yourself, as in calculate that value yourself or do some other information, do some other workaround. I hope that helps. And let me know if you have any follow-up questions about that. Just go ahead and put it in the chat, in the Q&A section, sorry. Okay, Cornelius, I'm gonna go ahead and answer the rest of your questions as well. If you wanted to build an app, so one of your questions is about map layers. I'm sure you got inspired by our map view. Let me go ahead and show you the map view. Let me find a board that will have this on here. Here is my random Jira integration board, and I'm gonna go ahead and add a location column to it. So the location column is really useful because it lets you place locations from Google Maps on your board. So in here, if I search for my address, 3533 32nd Street, Long Island City, if I search for the Blink Fitness near my house, Steinway, there we go. I've got all of these locations in here. And if I click on the location, it will pull up the map view. And the map view lets me see all of these locations in a handy dandy Google map. I can zoom in, I can zoom out, I can do all sorts of cool stuff. I'm sure you were inspired by that. On the back end, what this is doing is it is rendering a map view from Google Maps inside of an iframe, which itself is inside of another iframe, which is the board view itself. So you could set something up similarly using, I know there are a lot of different open map APIs out there. Google Maps, of course, is the big one, but then there's also Apple Maps and a bunch of open source ones as well. So you can definitely set something like this up, and you can take the data from your monday.com account. One caveat is that the location column right now is only supported in read-only mode via our API. So these pieces of data, you can read them, but you won't be able to update them via our API. That's the one caveat I would put in, but otherwise building out like an app that uses multiple map layers is definitely possible. Okay. Tejas is asking, how do I carry over the hours column across boards? And can our monday.com support team help you do that? So Tejas, the solution that I was proposing earlier, by passing the hours and dates across boards, you will need to create an app for that, and you will need to build some server-side logic to do that. Our support team is primarily for support of our main UI product and not developer support. So we cannot help you do that, help you build this out yourself. We can, however, give you additional context and help you kind of debug any issues that you run into. The best way to get help from the kind of monday.com network as a whole is to post in the community. So if you start building this out and you have any questions, go ahead and post in community.monday.com, and you'll get answers either from me, from our team, or from one of our many community experts, some of whom are on this call right now. Yeshwant asks, you mentioned earlier that monday.com uses containers and any process we define will be run inside them. Are there any particular limits defined in terms of the number of columns or rows to process? So let me, I think I need to walk back what I talked about when I said containers. I didn't necessarily mean containers on the server side. I was really just talking about iframes. Each of these board views is rendered in an iframe, and that's what I meant by a container. Like it's a view container essentially. We don't have any like limits when it comes to the amount of processes that this particular container has. I'm sure there's an upper limit, and I'm sure you can find it, but we don't have anything enforced. As for processes that read and write data, you will be using our API for that, and our API does have a set of rate limits as well. These rate limits are quite generous, if I may say so myself. And you can go to our documentation and click on API documentation at the top to learn more about our API, and there's a rate limit section here as well. Let me know if that helps. Theodore, you lost connection. I'm happy to answer your question. Basically, you were saying that you are having problems running the quick start in your Windows 10 PC. We do have, so we tested it and it worked fine for us, but we do have a post in the community where someone else is reporting the same issue. I would love for you to post there so that we can kind of compare those two issues, isolate the issue, and hopefully fix it. No problem at all. Okay, we've got 5 more questions. Okay, so Cornelius is asking, is there a way to change the status in the status column based on a result in the formula column? Yes and no. Firstly, our API does not support reading the formula column, so there isn't a way to read that formula column and update the status. However, if you wanted to build an app that changes the status based on some calculation on your board, you could set that up. What I would do if I was to build that app is I would watch for changes in a certain set of number columns, define my formula inside the integration, and basically say, like, if column 1 and column 2 is over 100, I would then make a request to our API to change the status to red or something like that. So it is possible to do it based on a calculation from number columns, but you wouldn't use the formula column to do that. I would recommend either hard coding it or building the calculation into your integration recipe in some way. Tejas asks, if you don't have a developer background, can you build a Monday app? I would highly recommend starting by learning the basics of building web applications, either client-side or server-side. There are a ton of free resources online that you can use to learn. And then once you do that, you can come in and start building Monday apps. It does require some level of technical familiarity in order to build anything. There are ways to build no-code apps using just our native triggers and actions. But from what you're asking me, what you want to do, it sounds to me like those will not be sufficient, and you will need to build an app yourself with you'll need to build an app by writing some code. You're also asking where you would understand the basics of building an app. I would recommend going to our documentation for that. So to do that, you click on your developer section. So you go to this manage your apps page, and then you click on documentation. And this will send you to our help center for all things apps. You can use this to learn about our SDK and also build simple apps using our examples. Boss mentions, I think it was for someone else who was talking about dates. He says that the moment JavaScript library is really helpful if you want to manipulate dates. I think that is a great tip. Thank you, Boss. And Cornelius, this is the last question. How do we get the SDK and set up testing and deployment? That is a really good question. Our SDK is a JavaScript library. If you click on SDK reference, it'll send you to the GitHub repo. Most people will put this, will install this via NPM if they have a server-side app, or will include it in their production build to download from the CDN. However, if you are like last week, I spoke to somebody who is working in a very, very controlled environment, and they can't just pull a library from a CDN. In that case, you can always download it locally to your machine and install it if you want to do that as well. So this is how you get the SDK, and you can use this for developing apps. As for testing and deploying apps, right now, we don't have a great way of doing version control, but it is something that is on our roadmap. Not on our roadmap for like long term, but on our roadmap for relatively soon. It's a priority for us. Right now, the best way to, right now, every time you create a new build of a client-side app, you can choose to deploy it or not. So I believe that I would say is the best way to test and deploy. You can use the view setup section to test, and then you can use the build section to deploy, and you can also roll back if you wanted to. For integrations, things are a little bit more difficult, and that's where I was saying that like the version control is being improved right now. There isn't really a way to test and deploy integrations unless you create two integrations, one that is production and then another app that is purely for testing, and then you just migrate the settings from your testing app to your production app. It's a little bit more work, but that's what's going to let you have that production environment that you can let free for your users and kind of let that run loose, and then your more in your staging environment, which is a little bit more controlled as well. I hope that answered your question. You had some great questions, everybody. Thank you so much. Okay, so we have run out of open questions. There are a couple of things we can do right now. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen.